Morning. Welcome to Excellence in Professional Practice Online Learning. We're so pleased that you're here joining us today. I'll just take a moment to open with some introductions. And so I'm going to, got it. Okay, so it's my pleasure this morning to introduce the superintendent who will walk us through the first story of practice. And that superintendent is Dr. Nancy Spencer-Poitras. And if you had a chance to read the online bio, you'll know that she's the superintendent of schools for Northland School Division and has been since 2020. She has a wide array of background relative to school and division leadership. She has an extensive career starting as a teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and superintendent at this point in Alberta. The other person next on the slide is Dr. Tim Stensland. And as Nancy has mentioned, Dr. Tim cannot join us today. He's doing some work in the jurisdiction, but you will see a video that he'll be sharing his aspects of the story of practice. And next to Tim, we have John Waterhouse. John is joining us today. And John, as you know, is the executive director of the ERLC. And so, of course, is passionate about professional learning. John, as well, has a wide breadth and depth of experience and expertise, serving at many, many positions in the education system and focusing on professional learning at all levels. And then myself, CAS consultant, Colleen Simrose-Watt, and John and I will be guiding you today through this particular story of practice. I'd like to take a moment to do the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on traditional territory, gathering grounds, and meeting place, and the traveling route of Treaty 6 First Nations, the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Nations. Treaty 7 First Nations, the Blackfoot Confederacy of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani Nations, the Stoney Nakoda Nation of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Good Stoney Nations, and Tsuut'ina Nation. Treaty 8 First Nations of the Cree, Denta, Denza, and Densili Nations, and the traditional home of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit peoples of the past whose footsteps have shaped this land, and those of the present and future who will continue to shape it for centuries to come. We're committed to restoring and honoring the truth and reconciliation calls to action. We strongly believe that truth must be acknowledged to move forward to reconciliation. Engaging in responsible and reciprocal relationships with our First Nations and Métis communities is the path forward to reconciliation. Together, we call upon our collective communities to build a stronger understanding and relationship of all peoples who dwell on this land we call home. We'd like to take a minute just to populate the chat and have a look at the image that you have before you, which marries all three professional practice standards: the teaching quality standard, leadership quality standard, and the superintendent leadership quality standard. And what we're asking is, what do you notice in the diagram that describes the role of educators in Alberta's professional practice standard? Thanks, Rianne. Center is students. Optimal learning. Thanks, Shauna. Thanks, Cal. Accountability. So certainly there are some common threads that join the three professional, thanks, Nancy. Some common threads that join all three professional practice standards. And you've mentioned those throughout those comments. Focused on optimal student learning. So if we look particularly at the green, you'll see that we're all striving for that optimal learning for our students. As we progress into the agenda, you'll see that we have four areas we're going to tackle today. At a very, very high level, we're going to talk about the 4 university research study. Then we'll talk about the Northland School illustrative case study practice. And we're hoping to get some conversation in with colleagues. And then of course, we'll have the evaluation is super short. I promise you, it's 5 questions, and we'd love to have your feedback. Having a look at implementing Alberta's professional practice standard. This is the study that forms the foundation of what we're going to learn today. And what that particular study was focused on doing was assessing and deepening the Alberta professional practice standards. So looking at extending the implementation process, and they've spent 4 years looking at what does that mean from a research perspective. And if we hit the next slide, thanks, Claudine, you'll see the 4 universities, and some of these names may be very, very familiar to you. You may have worked with them. You'll see the 4 universities that have been involved in this study. And Dr. Sharon Friesen is the principal investigator on this particular study and very good about answering her email should you have any specific questions or need any background research for your particular jurisdiction. If we have a look at the next slide, you can see all of the work that has been involved over the 4 years. So there is a literature review, survey reports. What we're focused on is that middle circle area, which are the 10 case studies. And we'll get to hear one of those case studies today. And then of course, a number of surveys and interviews. So with that, that provides a little bit of the foundation of where we're going to head today. It's my great pleasure to turn this over to Dr. Nancy Spencer-Poitras, who will share the Northland School Division case study.
And if we just move to the next slide, I just want to, first off, thank you all. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk with colleagues and to share the story of Northland, because we've done so many things that we're proud of. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to let us share our story. So I know some of you have listened before, so I'm going to go through some of this fairly quickly, but Northland's very unique in the fact that they had no board for 8 years. There was a public trustee that was assigned to Northland from 2010 to almost end of 2017. And what that did is it was like steering a ship without a captain. And so the system culture that we had was very much about good is good enough. They were sort of in a state of, just maintaining where they were. The geographic distribution, if you don't know it, we're about 280,000 kilometers wide. We go as far east as you can go, as to the Saskatchewan border, basically, to Grand Cache on the west. We go past Fort McMurray, and we start out at Calling Lake. So we're almost half of the size of the province. So you can imagine with a district that size, the cost to bring people together would be prohibitive. And so there was many, many initiatives. And as a matter of fact, Tim and I, we've worked on our doctorate together. So what we started to do is we started looking at the number of initiatives. And one year there was 156 initiatives in our school district. And it was because there was no connection, no systematic process in which we were developing any professional learning, etc. Everybody was doing their own thing. And so if a principal went to a particular professional learning, they'd come back and say, we're going to do this. And somebody else would do that. But there was no research base to it. It was just, I saw this, it looked good, I'm going to do it. And because of our isolated areas, we don't always get the teachers who have had a lot of experience. So you're bringing in teachers who have not had a lot of experience, not a lot of direction, not a lot of professional learning. The attendance in our schools has been monitored by the Auditor General for the last, oh my goodness, 8 years. We're hoping to get rid of it this year, where they, at any point in time, they can access our enrollment on any particular day. And so we're constantly doing reports for them and trying different ways to get the kids to school. Our high school completion was very, very low. And so, and I'll talk to that on the next slide of some of the things that we put in place to do that. And just simply the time to meet. If we were bringing principals together, which we did twice a year, we'd bring all the principals to Edmonton. For some principals, that meant they were out of the school one day to travel there because it was 7 hours to get to Edmonton. Then you do 2 days of PD and then another day back. So really you were, the school might not have a principal for 4 or 5 days. And then of course, the uniqueness of Northland. We are made up of communities that are either Métis or First Nations. And basically, as a superintendent, I have to deal with many chiefs and presidents, etc. So, and every community is very, very different. So knowing that background, if we can go to the next slide. Tim and I, and we, like I said, we took our doctorate together. We started to dig into some of the reasons why Northland wasn't producing where it needed to do. And so we looked at our high school. And I know Tim is going to get more into the specifics, the drivers, etc., in his explanation of the actual research project. I'm giving you more of the story format. And so what we did is we started to dig into the data. And what we discovered was that we had teachers who were thinking not only was good enough, but they really didn't think they could make a difference for these students. So we needed to change that mindset. So, and we needed to have a reason why they needed to change the mindset. So by digging through the evidence, we were able to present to the teachers why we needed to change practice. And the pandemic, although it was horrible for us, it allowed us to blow the entire district up. Because we had 7 schools out with the forest fires the year before, what it did is I had gone to the board and said, we need to be connected through technology. So we had put technology in place in September of 2019. So by March the 13th of 2020, we had our very first district-wide PD across the entire division with secretaries, EAs, principals, the whole bit. The whole group was on. And then of course, 2 days later, the government shut everything down. That time from March to June, we did over 900 professional learning sessions with our staffs, all of our staffs, to get them on up to what they needed to know about SLPs, OTs, literacy, numeracy, etc. And so then going into the following year, we started looking at, okay, how do we change the culture? How do we get people to believe that they do make a difference in the learning of students? And one of the things that Donahue speaks about, she said, for a culture to change, you have to change the beliefs of the participants that they actually can make a difference in student performance. And so they need to go from seeing that, in fact, students' learning is being improved because of what you do. So we then, from our research, went and looked at what were the best practices for math, for example. We looked at how do we improve high school completion? Well, we dug through 5 years of data, and what we discovered through that 5 years of data diving was that the kids who did not receive many credits in their first semester of their high school year dropped out. There was a significant correlation to that. So we had to figure out, okay, how do we get these kids to get more credits earlier on so that they feel that they can be successful? Again, 6 high schools across a very diverse area. How do you offer them the same high school program that everyone else has? So what we did is we challenged our principals. We said, here's the issue. How can we come up with a common high school timetable? Well, guess what? This year we did. We piloted a high school timetable so that if our teacher in Paddle Prairie is an outstanding math teacher, she can teach kids who are in Wabasca-Desmarais. We can do some of our CTS that ways. We've combined CTS weeks so that students can have an opportunity to spend a week doing particular CTS activities that they wouldn't normally have, with the idea of helping these kids see themselves be successful. In turn, what that has done is it has enabled us to give the reason why teachers, you need to change what you're doing. And so we've come up with a systematic professional learning, which I'm very proud of. I don't know how many school districts could say that they have 8 full days for common PD time, but we do. And later on in the presentation, I'll just show you a sample format of how we did that. But through doing all of this, what we have started to see is a change in culture. We're getting teachers who are able to talk. If they're the only grade 1, 2, 3 teacher over at this school, they're connecting with the teacher on the other side of the province who's also teaching the same. But we've seen a huge increase in the collective efficacy across the entire division. And as we all know, that is the biggest effect on student learning, is that collective efficacy. It's that 1.57, I think, is what Hattie says it is. And we are seeing that at the principal level. And we're hoping that as we work through this year, we're hoping that we're starting to see more of it at the actual day-to-day level. So that kind of just gives you the idea of how we got the change in culture. We needed to show teachers why. We did the research-based, and we're now in the changing of culture. So if we go to the next slide, again, it was changing about, instead of saying, well, we can't do this, we're too big, we needed to change the thinking. We needed to change that, and we did it through the research-based focus on the instructional leadership, numeracy, and collective efficacy. And the book that we use with all of our principal is called Collective Efficacy, and it's by Jenny Donahue. And we use that at our monthly meetings with principals. So we went from 2 meetings in a year in Edmonton to having 1, sometimes 2 professional learning sessions for principals every month, because now they can stay in their school, they can not be away for 3 or 4 days, but it has allowed us to be able to talk about instructional leadership, to do coaching, etc., because of that time period. Time is not a barrier for us anymore. We've redesigned our calendar. We have, as I said, we have 8 district-wide professional learning days. We've limited the initiatives. Through our research, we looked at what are the biggest bang for the buck on helping students be successful, helping teachers feel successful. And so one of the things also is the culture was about good is good enough. No, we now talk about we want excellence, and it's every decision has to be putting children and students first. So now we're going to go into Tim. And as I said, it's a shame that him and I aren't talking together, because we bounce ideas back and forth really well. And that's why I think we've been so successful, as our executive team just works together as one unit, and an idea becomes better and better. But I'll let him get into the actual specifics of the research. Thank you.
Are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
We're not hearing him, Claudine.
Sorry, let's try that again.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. I apologize that I can't join you live. However, I do feel fortunate to be a part of this presentation. So my portion of this presentation will refer to how the implementation of Alberta's 2018 Professional Standards Study, and specifically the illustrative case study report, relates to what actually happens at Northland School Division. So I've highlighted 2 areas where I will focus on. One are the elements, which is hard to describe because as you'll see when I reveal them, they're part of the context, they're part of other variables that I believe contribute to the success. But also, how do the implementation drivers relate to the work that is done in Northland School Division? So naturally, what we did is probably what many of you did. We looked at what did we actually do And how does it relate to the report? So what I'd like to talk about now is those aspects. So the elements came about because we realized that we needed a shift in thinking. We needed to think a bit differently. And hopefully I can help you understand that by saying, when you're new to a school district, you come in. You come in with eyes wide open. You come in with history, knowledge, experience, and you hope to apply it to the new context. One of the realities in coming into Northland was that we thought maybe we can't leverage what we did. Maybe all that past experience wouldn't be as valuable if we weren't open to learning and understanding. And what makes itself immediately apparent when you start in Northland, and so that was for myself and Nancy 6 years ago, were the barriers. Because you see things that maybe you weren't accustomed to. Let me give you a few examples. One of those barriers would be rural, remote north. Those factors contributed to a lot more power outages in schools, water outage, inclement weather for traveling, bus distances. That really is a barrier to learning. Another example might be in staffing. I worked in an urban district. I was used to people banging on my door, trying to get jobs, and it was an effort to work through all the applications and select what you believe to be the best and the right fit for your organization. Not so in Northland School Division. We don't attract as many, so it's a different context. We never have a certificated substitute in most schools. So those are barriers, and sometimes they stand out and they tell you this is a barrier, but focusing on those won't be helpful. And I could go on and on with some other examples too. Attendance is a big one. Maybe I'll share that one because as an administrator in an urban environment, I can remember a few attendance meetings with parents, but not many at all. However, attendance is always on the radar, always critically important in Northland School Division. It's critical. So the shift in thinking went from focusing on the barriers to working with the possibility. So working with the possibility meant we had to focus on three elements when we sat back. One was time, space, and attention. So time, there's no magic about time. If you don't allow time for it, if you don't dedicate time for something, it magically won't appear. We realized you have to allocate time for things. Space. Space is the other example. You won't dig down deep and take something up with the time and attention that's needed if you don't create a space. And a good example of this was principal learning time. If we did not make a space in the principal meetings, it wouldn't occur in the same way. So in our principal meetings, we dedicate 2 hours out of 3 to learning time, to taking up topics. And the next element that I want to highlight is attention. Attention refers to basically what you think it is. If you're distracted when you're driving, you're probably not paying attention to the most important thing. I saw a real example of that the other day. And so in Northland School Division, there was so much going on. And when we counted the number of initiatives, the number of new items, the changes, it was close to 150 things that we could list that had changed. Then you drill that down and say, what's it like at the principal level? What's it like at the secretary level? What's it like at the teacher level and the executive level? It's hard to pay attention to specific things when there's too much going on. So attention is critical as well. So those will come into play as we talk about the drivers. I just wanted to highlight in the implementation, in the report, there's implementation drivers, and they're defined as following: competency drivers, and essentially that's ensuring that those who must put the standards into practice are competent and feel confident. There's organizational drivers, and it sounds like what it is. Essentially, there's an organizational component that can hinder or facilitate the success of what you're trying to achieve. And then finally, leadership drivers. And that's the way that leaders both attend to technical and adaptive challenges. Now, I know what you're thinking. Everything just lined up for you? Not really. So that's why I'll try to align our story, what we did, with the implementation drivers. And this has been a good exercise to look at how they connect, to truly understand what the report says and how we see it. So we have a system focus, which I think is quite equivalent to the competencies drivers. And I would say it is like a competency. When you look at the leadership competencies, they overlap. They aren't always separate. You find that in the drivers also. And so the system focus has a little bit of the last driver as well. So structural focus and organizational drivers is a very clear alignment. That is pretty well straight across. And then our third focus would be an implementation focus, or you could call it a coherence focus, and it related to the leadership drivers. And I would say there's a reinforcement piece there that aligns well with the leadership, but some of the
That's not one of our drivers.
I never used to realize the impact of the structural focus, but it's something I really pay attention to and am quite excited to look at because I think it's powerful. So the structure of an organization controls and facilitates the flow of information and resources. If we look at a traditional hierarchy, it's designed in a linear way. And it's designed so that the information flows a certain path, the dollars flow a certain path. It's meant to be stable and structured and controlled, which is great if that's what you require for your priorities. However, if the structure does not facilitate that and does not align with that, then the structure needs to be adjusted to support the priority focus. And that's an area which I think has gained a lot of leverage for us. And I'll give you a few examples. One example was principal meetings. When I started, we were meeting with principals 3 times a year. Everybody had to travel and go great distances, but it was only 3 times a year that we met with principals. We did meet in areas with principals more often than that. However, there wasn't always the same coherence and consistency in those meetings. And COVID taught us this great lesson that you don't have to drive, you don't have to schedule. Well, you do have to schedule, but you can meet when you need to meet. And so with the results of our learnings out of COVID is we now have 12 times a year, 2 times we come together, but we're meeting on a regular basis around the learning meetings. But we had to forego the existing structure and say, we can change it. And it was very beneficial. The next one was a professional learning calendar and common professional learning days. We used to have one professional learning day or an org day that was common. It was usually around October the 5th, and it's where we'd work together with all schools and look at our results and work on our planning for the 3-year plan. That has now switched to where we have 8 professional learning days that are common across the district. And how did we come about this? We came about it because we heard feedback from teachers. We have teachers who are the only teacher in the building that have that assignment. And they were saying, how can we collaborate with others? How can we work together on topics that are critically important for student success and for our success? So as a result, the work around common professional learning times has been phenomenal. And I would say it allows us to, when you think about it, for the new curriculum implementation, there were actually 9 or 10 times we came together for a dedicated time, not counting times outside of school hours, but where we came together to take up those topics and apply them to our work as educators. And if we didn't have that, we couldn't have that concerted focus. So it's been phenomenal. The other aspect is the common high school scheduling. Yes, common high school scheduling across all schools. So this came about when we looked at the data and we met with all schools that have high school components, and we saw some areas where we wanted to enhance and bolster. One of the critical ones was we looked at student success when they first start high school, that first semester, first year, and what are they finding in their success. We broke that down into about 12 case examples where we looked at the profile, looked at what happened, and said, what can we do differently? We took the data back to the schools with the staff and worked with the principals. And what we came up with was the structure that currently exists is preventing us from doing more in 2 ways. One is doing the possibility of, pardon me, my phone just rang, and it's the person I'm presenting with, Nancy. Pardon me. It impacted the way we can schedule, what we can offer, what we can provide, because we have some small schools. But it also interfered with the opportunity for development. So we put all that together, selected topics for the professional learning time, came out with a schedule which would facilitate more flexibility, more opportunities for students. So now students can take a course in any school in the district. It didn't take off 100%, but it's working, and we've got excellent pockets. We've got students in Paddle Prairie on the west side of the province that are taking courses with Bill Woodward on the east side, along with students in other schools or in an online program. And so that is a real component of the structural focus, because when you think you start and you want to look at a common schedule, common class times, things like that, you think there's going to be busing, there's going to be holidays, which are all the same, but we do have some school-specific wellness days, bells, all those things had to come together, and they were perceived barriers. There was one point where we thought, I don't know if we're going to make it through this, but the principals working together and seeing the common benefit of challenging different structures proved to be phenomenal. And so then it's also in the structural focus is the admin and learning support for schools and teachers. But there was a structural piece where we have to set things in motion to enable that to happen. So the final piece is the implementation focus, or the implementation, the coherence component that reinforces that focus. And so this is where It involves practice, it reinforces, and it realigns. It's where we go from the formulation, this is what we're doing, to the implementation, and we connect those two. And there's an iterative piece, because in the implementation, if we need to fix something or adjust it, it goes back to the first focus and adjusts it. So an example here would be how the principals meetings work. They're research informed, so it might involve reading something or looking at a video as the first part. The second part is they're applying it. They're working in breakout groups, they're applying it to a school-based situation and working with their colleagues. Third would be an action where they take it back to the school. They work on it, they may work with the staff, and then finally there's a homework component where they bring back the results of what they've done and share that. Often there will be a situation in those leadership meetings where the principal will follow a very similar format to do something similar with the staff that he or she has participated in the principal meeting. And so then there's also the networks of support and communities of practice. And that has developed to ensure that we're reinforcing and practicing. It's based on the premise that until we allow the beliefs and values of individuals to emerge and be put on the table, it's not as powerful. But once I say this is what I believe in, and here's the example of what I've done, it causes me to be much more vulnerable and open. It assists with turning teaching from a private endeavor to more of a public endeavor. So some other examples of how we do that is teachers are expected to do a 10-minute video of their math lessons specifically and weekly and review them. They've got some choices. Do I share it with somebody else or just view it myself, but then talk about it? But that's been growing. Each school has a number of OWL cameras, swivel, and Chromebooks to record. And it's quite exciting. And the whole goal is to broaden the network of understanding across the district. And that relates to the implementation focus. So finally, I would sum it up by saying, hopefully you can see how if we can manage the time, space, and attention so that the most important things are valued, and then relay it to the focuses or the implementation drivers, it assists us with hopefully being successful. Thank you for your time today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks to Tim for walking us through that piece. We thought we would just take a couple of minutes to touch base with participants. And John, do you want to handle this little discussion for about 5 minutes?
Sure. Nancy, we had a chance to visit the other day, and I really appreciate Tim's presentation. Just from my heart and my experience, I look at this and it was so smooth the way he went through everything. But the reality is the toe-to-toe conversations, the things that you have to go through sometimes with people, this is still really hard work and it's very nuanced work. So I think one of the questions I would have just for participants is, when you listen to this, it hits the research, it hits all of the implementation and those factors. What do you feel, if you've tried this kind of thing, are barriers that you've run into and successes, because Northland's achieved success? I remember talking to a colleague one time and he had great vision. And I said, so how's it going? And he said, they won't let me lead. And I thought, oh my gosh, there's that nuance again of, well, how do you get to be able to get that culture aligned? And so I'm just looking for responses from the people that are here. It sounds wonderful, but when you try it, it's complicated and it's a lot of hard work. So just from your experiences in your leading, what do you feel with what you've heard and what you've experienced?
Just unmute your mics and let's have an open discussion. We're a small enough group.
Well, I can start. I'll start. How about that? I'll jump into the deep end. I thought it was, well, I think it's great. I think that COVID, and I know that Rand can probably say the same thing for Buffalo Trail. I do feel that, and we're not as large geographically anywhere near that Buffalo Trail or Northland School Division is, but I really feel that because of COVID and our improved technology, it has really found a way for us to bring leadership together more often. And I think that that's been a really positive thing when our technology works, because as you know, sometimes in our rural areas, sometimes it does not work as well, but I think it's been a great positive shift. One of the barriers for us, and Nancy, I'd kind of like to know with you guys, and I'm sure Rianne has the same question. For us, for Sturgeon, so again, sorry, Sturgeon Public Schools, our context is so diverse across our schools. So we have one big high school, one small one, we have our outreach centers. So we actually have been really working, we'd hoped to pull the trigger on it for this year, it didn't happen, but to have the common high school timetable between basically our two high schools. And so that's great. So we've been unpacking that, etc. But I've been trying to pull our principals together more because, as you know, this government likes to make everything about choice, and it's getting worse. And so we were really noticing the challenges of transportation and parents because our schools were competing with each other. And it's like, why is the student that lives in that catchment now wanting to get transportation to go to this school? So how are we not either offering the right programming in that school or what's happening? So we started a big deep dive in this year to create the time and space for our principals to get together, especially those that had the same configuration of grades, but it didn't matter because we're all over the place. We have K to 4, 5 to 9, K to 9, and then we have high school and we have a 5 to 12. So was to look at what's the programming or what's missing. Like, why do the parents not want to go to that school? So that was one piece, and we're trying to fix that, but I know we've made some progress, but still not there. But we've really tried to look at, especially our CTF programming in our grade 5 to 9 group, like what are we offering and why is it, or if it's academies, whatever, why are parents leaving? So that was one thing we were looking at. But one of the barriers we're really finding is we're trying to be more uniform across the division, but man, in our division, we are so diverse. I have the have cream of the crop communities that it's like you ask even your parents for money and they throw it at you, to the have-nots. And I'm finding it's quite difficult to navigate to even bring our division together because we're so diverse in our have and have-nots. So that's kind of where we are. But I really love listening about this because I really feel that technology to offer a professional, more consistent professional development, that consistent language of, you know, when you said, you know, what's good enough, it's kind of interesting, especially if it's in have-not communities where and attendance is an issue. So I love hearing that, and thank you for your story. But I do feel for us, one of our barriers when we're trying to focus on looking at common, consistent, optimal learning across the division is trying to also match the context that the school is located in.
And if I might respond to that, I appreciate the diversity of your school division. We have a very diverse, there's no two communities that are alike. So we have 18 communities, plus we have an online school. And again, depending on whether it's a Métis settlement or a band school, well, no, sorry, not a band school, but it's a First Nations, huge differences. We have, you know, around one particular area around Anzac, there's more money, whereas other areas there isn't. We have all of that. And what I found, and I appreciate Tim, like, just so you know, we didn't go through all of those names. That's how they were referred to in the research. And so there was a little bit of overlap of what he said and I said, but he was trying to just present the research. But what we found, Shauna, is that talking with the principals, and getting them to see that as a whole, we are stronger and that we need to figure out how to be able to program across the division. It's not a competition, but how do we allow all students to have an equitable education? So like I'm thinking, when you talk about CTF, how do you do from the 5 to the 9? We found that by having common CTS times for our high school, and this is new, this is the first time we've done this across our division, it has really improved attendance, if you can imagine that, because students are having opportunities to do things like cosmetology, which they never would do in a high school of, say, 15 kids. So with your CTF, if you can get your principals together and talk about possibly something like we've done, where you maybe have a CTF day, where kids can learn across your division, whether it be through technology or depending on how close you are, whether you can bus kids. But it was sitting down with principals and saying, look, this is an issue, help us to solve the issue. And it didn't happen right. Like I appreciate John saying, yes, it looks really smooth and everything. The vision of the common high school timetable was something I put out two and a half years ago. It took us a year of conversation, and then this is our first year piloting it, and it's, like I said, taking off. So I think bringing your people together and just talking about sort of what you see as the barriers or opportunities to be creative. And by all means, give us a call. Cal was very much involved in those meetings, and he can tell you how we've done it at the high school level. And it's funny that you mentioned the elementary, junior high, because we're having that conversation right now. How can we increase that offerings for those grade levels? So we're trying to figure out how we're going to do it for the elementary. But sitting down and, showing them that, there is a need, and again, doing that data analysis so that we could say, here's what the data is telling us. How do we do it? And it's worked really well for us. But yeah, it didn't happen overnight, but you're certainly welcome to reach out to us and we can share our learnings with you.
Any other comments?
I just really appreciate the focus on time and repeating that it didn't happen overnight, because, we do know what the research, has indicated. And I appreciate when Tim was speaking about the time, the space, the attention. You look at that, the system focus over time. We're all trying to do that great work that we know can happen. We're in the process of doing the common timetable. We brought our people together, and it has been a process up till now, and what we will implement next year. It wasn't, kind of, oh, I have this great idea and everybody bought in. I've been here 3 years, and it takes some time to get to where we want to be. So I appreciate that kind of relief that it's okay that this is where we're at right now, and good things will happen with that. And that focus, that preciseness, I appreciate. You talked about those 150 initiatives, and schools are doing great things. We're very diverse. They had autonomy. We're bringing them together. And what the data does tell us is they want less. They want us to say we're doing this. So we still have some work to do. And the diverseness, Shauna, that you talked about, diversity, well, both of you have talked about in your divisions. I think we all have it. Every school division, the older I get, the more I realize every community, every school has that uniqueness, the culture, the people, 10 minutes apart or 3 hours apart. There are vast differences in who's attending and who's surrounding the school. So we have to pay attention to all of that. And of course, then it makes up our complex divisions and working together. And yeah, it's just kind of a little puzzle that we continue to put together. So no, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks.
Thanks, Rianne. A little puzzle that has like 2,000 pieces, right? All right. Well, Nancy, we're going to turn it back over to you. We'll give you about 5 minutes to work through and wrap up. Please know that you will get all of the slides.
And this is just basically was what the university professors came up with, is that we are cultivating a culture that responds to adaptive changes like the pandemic. One of the things I can say is we use and I think it's on the next design research, where we started something. If things weren't going the way we thought it should, we didn't keep doing it. We would just change it, meet together, figure out what we needed to change. So it was a constantly evolving process. And the culture of collaboration, as I said, I think that's the strongest. Tim talked specifically about all of the breakdowns of the report, and I just spoke generally. You're hearing the same message from both of us about what we're doing. And I think that's a strong thing, is that everyone is talking the same message. They're hearing it from my entire executive. They're hearing it from the principals. It takes all of us working together to be able to do it. And the collaborative conversations that happen at the different professional learning sessions is absolutely amazing. I mean, if you can imagine, you want to talk diverse schools, can you imagine a teacher who has to teach K to grade 4? We do have some, but we might have one on one side of the province and a teacher on the other side who's also teaching K to 4. They've never had the opportunity to collaborate and to plan together. With this common PD days, the 8 of them, in the afternoon, we give those teachers the opportunity to be able to talk to other teachers, to network with them, to share learnings with them, because otherwise they'd never have that opportunity. So we've put in the framework to allow for that collaboration to happen, not just with the executive or with the principals, but for the entire division. And we're finding that it is making a difference. We're starting to see the needle move. And as someone from Alberta Ed said to me, Nancy, we haven't seen the needle move in Northland for about 10 years. But again, if you're not expecting any changes and you're expecting to maintain and you're not giving people a reason why they need to change, it's going to continue. So we're quite excited to see the needle moving towards a positive. If I can maybe just move to the next slide, if I could. This is one of our principals said, first and foremost, it's the way we interact with principals now. The virtual enables timely responsibility to connect. And so I think when we have our principals meetings, that is the connection point where I think it builds coherence, because there's no layers in between. It's your superintendents that connecting with the people that are leading. So again, it's about making sure everybody is getting the same message about why we're doing what we're doing, and giving them the opportunity to have input in what we're doing. Again, it's about, yes, and thank you, Rayanne. It's about talking excellence. The next slide talks about, the associate superintendents also do the one-on-one connection with the schools. And so again, communication, making sure they have follow-up, making sure that they have support. One of the things with our professional learning is, we all know, there's 7 characteristics of it, but one of the big ones is that it has to be embedded, it has to be ongoing, and it has to be evaluative. And that's what we do all the time in all of our sessions. If I can move to the next slide. It's hard because I'm trying to talk really fast here. So if you want me to, iterate anything else, by all means, just give me a call. The high school success.
Thank you. I think you're doing great, Nancy. Not to worry. We are tight on time, but we could probably cover much of it on your what's important slide. I just don't want you to skip through that one.
Okay. The high school success, I have to tell you, digging deep, that we had a couple of our staff dig deep into that data for 5 years, was so telling. I mean, that when we brought that back to the principals, it was, aha, so what do we do to help these kids see that they can be successful? That was probably one of the high points of getting that high school common timetable going. Just next slide is just an example. This is an example of our common professional learning day. So if you see, for example, from 9 to 12, we have all of our K-8 teachers involved in Math Minds. And then in the afternoon, other things. We don't have time to go over it, but I thought we would include it in here so that if you wanted to see what we do, there's an example for you. And again, if you want to go to the links, you'll see some of the other things. The afternoon is more about, those were designed based on what people asked. So the morning, it was a no no decision, sorry, it's numeracy and literacy because we need to do that. And in the afternoon, those courses and those activities were designed by what teachers were telling us they wanted. Okay, what is important? Thank you, Colleen. And again, talking fast. Our work has been researched. And again, Tim and I have had the wonderful relationship. We both worked on our doctorates together. And we really sync very, very well in our thoughts. And one of the things we both knew when we looked at Northland is, how do we change this? You know, why is the results, or why are the results the way they are? And so we did the research, found out what we had to do, but then we also researched what is the best method of teaching math. How do we input that? How do we input that into our professional learning? So the data analysis, and then the planning, or the and then the implementation, ensuring that we had the structural elements in place, because we knew what needed to be done. But again, one of the things that every good leader knows is if you get too far ahead of everybody, you become the enemy. So you have to make sure that as you're going through each of these steps, that you are involving your staff. And so now that we can speak to all of our principals, and my executive, we meet twice a week in the morning, and we throw ideas off of each other. And that has really taken a good idea and made it better in many places. But it's allowed us to make sure that we've put the planning in place, we've put the evaluation in place. So then that's something Tim didn't speak to, is that we are constantly evaluating and analyzing and seeing if what we're doing is working, because if it's not, then we need to change it. And Math Minds is a perfect example. When we partnered with the U of C with that, we had the teachers taking an actual course where they'd be sort of certified in Math Minds. And it was just too much on top of teaching, and the teachers let us know. And so what we did is we went back to the University of Calgary and we remodeled what it looked like. So it was more practical as opposed to theoretical. And then we got the buy-in with the teachers. But it's very much about constantly doing that touch base with people, seeing what's working, what we need to modify, something we might have missed. So it wasn't referred to in the research that Tim spoke to on the document, but that evaluation constantly is so very important, and being able to adapt to it. The other thing, building the capacity of others, that last thing there, this building the capacities, I don't have to be an expert, but I have to listen. And the capacity building that has happened in our district at the executive level, at the principal level, and at the teacher level is remarkable. I mean, people are doing things. I'm thinking of our technology director that just stepped into it. I mean, we're now doing a Hapara with you, Rayanne, and then some other school divisions. I mean, this is a division that 2.5, 3 years ago didn't have any technology, and now we're designing our own technology and tools for teachers. So, and that young man, when we put him in that position, I had no idea how he could grow with that position and how he took it and made it way beyond my wildest dreams. So again, it's building the capacity of others. The next slide. Okay, and I said, again, we use design-based research. So we're continually evaluating and adjusting to meet the necessary elements for every student to be successful. So when you're talking, Rayanne, about, you know, it takes a while to get there. I don't know that you ever get there, because you're constantly changing it. And especially with diverse communities, it might be about changing to meet certain things that need to happen in that particular community. This is my quote: "Nothing is impossible. It only invites creative thinking." And I'm very proud to say that my team has taken a vision and made it way beyond where I thought we would be at this time period. So, you know, no barriers, it only is opportunities. And leaders can build collective efficacy by communicating a strong belief in the capacity of the staff to improve the quality of teaching and learning. And that's been the biggest thing, is our teachers, when they said good is good enough, they didn't think they could have an impact on student learning. Now they're seeing that their teaching, in fact, is having an impact, and that's really strengthening our collective efficacy throughout the entire division. And thank you so much. And I apologize that I had to talk so fast, but thank you again for attending. And if you have any questions, you know, Rayanne or Shauna, with what you're doing, by all means, just reach out. We love to share.
Great. Thanks very much. I'm just getting back in here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm getting some funny things on my screen. So thanks very much, Nancy. We really appreciate you sharing our first illustrative case study. And thanks to participants for spending some time and looking at this whole realm of professional practice standards en route to us collectively across this province, creating optimal learning for our students. I've just copy, cut, and pasted the evaluation link. We'd love to have your feedback, as we too, very much like Nancy, are constantly looking at what we're doing and trying to be agile and meet the needs of our participants. So please provide us some feedback. It's only 5 questions relative to anything that you'd like to see in the next presentation. And you'll see in the thank you slide, we've also provided you Nancy's direct email and the next 2 sessions. And we hope to see you at the next 2 sessions. So have a